What's up guys, Justin Dixon with Precision Movement Institute. We've got an exciting video today. We're going to be breaking down the different variations of the muscle up. We got a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Let me first start out by saying that our goal here is not to say that one method is right and the other one is wrong. What we're looking to do is present both methods to you guys, show you guys the difference between the two, and then have you guys test them out for yourselves so that you guys can see which one might be more efficient for you. Now let's get into this. If you watched the 2018 games this year, individual event 2 was 30 muscle ups for time. Now for the most part, every athlete uses the same method with the backswing of the muscle up until the extension of the hip, with some variation there due to mobility. However, there's much more variation across the field once the athletes start the pull of the movement, so we want to look a little deeper into that. For the most part, we see the athletes in that event using these two methods. The straight leg method, commonly referred to as the gymnastics method. The second one is the bent knee method. Although each athlete started out using one of these two methods, as they got further into their reps, they actually moved all towards this bent knee method. And as they got further down into their last reps, the degree in the knee bend increased substantially. In watching this event, the only athlete that began and finished with the bent knee method was Logan Collins, and he's actually the winner of the event. In this clip, you'll see Logan breaking at the knees as his feet swing up underneath him. To our knowledge, no other athlete used this method. So did this method help him in his win? Is this method more superior than the other methods? Let's take a closer look. All right, now if we're looking at this from a physics standpoint, there's two basic principles that we're dealing with. Now we're gonna try to explain this to you guys without getting too far into the weeds because this can get pretty complex. So the first part that we're breaking down here is the rise of the body here. So all things being equal across both methods, the difference is this knee bend right here on this first part. And this first part that we're talking about, once this knee bends, that brings in the changing gravitational moment arm by changing the center of mass, okay? Or essentially bringing the center of mass closer to the center of rotation is gonna increase the upward force. Okay, so the first principle dealt with the upward rise of the body. The second principle talks about the rotation of the body, okay? Now, if we're gonna rotate an object, it makes sense to shorten that. That shortening of the object is actually gonna increase the rotational force there and make it much more efficient for that object to rotate.
What power!
So by bending the knee here, what that's gonna do is increase the efficiency of the rotation and the speed. Okay, so for example, if I'm gonna ask one of my athletes to do a front flip, I'm not gonna tell them to leave their legs out in front of them as they go into that front flip. What I'm gonna ask them to do is go in and bend the knees so that they can rotate more efficiently over the top.
Appreciate it! You know you get another couch!
To continue off of this, we're gonna show you how this actually assists the dip. Okay, so once he transitions over the top, this leg extends to stop the rotation. From there, the leg actually swings under again to help with the lift. As you can see, he rotates over the top and extends his legs to stop that rotation. Okay, from that extended position, immediately snaps the legs back into a tuck position, which allows him to efficiently move upward. All right, now that we've discussed the two different methods, let's show you how to do them. All right, so we're gonna cover the 10 different steps that you can take to implement these two different methods. Okay, the first being adjusting the height of the rings. Oftentimes people don't think about this, but if you can control the height of the rings, you should. So the key here is that you want to minimize the amount of jumping that you have to do while also minimizing the amount of extra pulling you will have to do to get into your position. I always suggest the distance allows you to swing at a full extension and not touch your toes. Anything further than that will just increase the fatigue factor by either the distance you are jumping or the extra height that you have to do to pull yourself into that starting position. All right, so the second thing we're going to talk about is jumping to the rings. With the jump, try to achieve a half pull or 90-degree arm bend. I don't like seeing my athletes jump and do a pull-up prior to the muscle up just to get into that pulling position to allow themselves to swing back into their backswing. You're already going to be doing a muscle up. There is no need to further fatigue yourself by doing a pull up and then a muscle up. Third thing that we're going to talk about is grip on the rings. A common fault that I see a lot of people, they do a false grip on the rings. Your grip on the rings should be a neutral grip. Okay, at the end of your pull, you're going to transition from that neutral grip into a false grip. This should save the forearms from holding that position the entire way through. All right, number 4 is the backswing. This is where a lot of people get it wrong, so pay attention. The backswing should be tight and long. You're trying to create tension, so don't be loosey-goosey. Every bit of tension that you create can be used to assist you in your next rep. Do not bend the legs. Keep the body tight, legs straight, and feet hip-width apart. This creates tension in the anterior chain by stretching the hamstrings and the hip flexors. Any deviation from this lessens the tension and makes each rep much harder. For example, think of a bow. As you draw back on the bow, you're creating a lot of tension. And what happens if you break the end of that bow? The arrow is actually just going to flop and hit the ground.
Tonight we feast.
So if you bend the legs, you lose the natural tension that can be used to propel you upward. Once you lose it, then you have to recreate that force, which will increase the fatigue factor. All right, so number 5 is the swing. Let the tension snap you from arch to hollow position. At the midway point of the swing, the body should be in a straight line from the ring to the floor. As you come through in the front swing, the toes should pass through the center line and begin to rise up into the hollow position, again with straight legs. So number 6 is the pull. As you rise to the hollow position, you then pull back on the rings into an overhead pull as you snap your hips upward. This changes your anchor point and allows your body to rise. There are 2 common faults here. Athletes pull to their hips or they pull early. If you pull too early, you end up pulling at the same time as you're snapping those hips, which greatly increases the amount of force that you're pulling against. The idea is to pull just after the hip snaps so that you are almost in a weightless state when you pull. This will allow the majority of the weight to be lifted by the hips, removing the lats and the biceps from the primary working position to an assistant role, reducing the fatigue. Okay, so number 7 is the 2 different variations of methods. First one, the straight leg. The second one, the bent knee. We're gonna break those down a little bit here. So the first one we see with the straight leg, one of the common problems we see with athletes is once they bend over the top, they leave their legs out straight and they have to get into this massive crunch. A lot of times athletes don't have the hamstring flexibility to try to crunch over the top. Okay, so by doing the second method, the bent knee method, what they're doing is they're shortening that hamstring length and allowing themselves to turn over, which actually makes it slightly more efficient for some athletes. So number 8 is the turnover. Regardless of the method that you decide to use, both methods require the same turnover for maximum efficiency. As your body rises from the pull, the head comes forward and the hands transition from a neutral grip to a false grip by rolling your wrists over the top. We do this to shorten the distance that you need to travel over the top of the rings. One common mistake that we see here is newer athletes trying to maintain a neutral grip, which requires you to travel the distance of your forearm over the top of the rings. This is not a problem if you're getting maximal height on each rep, but can become very problematic for athletes as they near their maximal reps. The false grip allows you to only have to travel a few inches above the rings. So some might argue that it's a good idea to hold the false grip throughout the entire movement, but our testing has shown that it actually fatigues out the athlete by trying to hold that position. So we recommend going from a neutral grip and transitioning into that false grip. So number 9 is the ring dip, and there's a whole bunch of different methods that people use to get themselves out of the dip. We're just going to discuss a couple different methods, and we'll discuss the other ones in other videos. All right, so as the athlete finishes the transition into the catch, what they're going to do from there is they're going to press out into the extended position on top of the rings. Now, whether you do a strict dip or you do a kipping dip, that's entirely up to you. Now, if I was in competition, I would recommend doing a kipping dip because that's going to save you a little bit of energy. Okay, so the last thing, number 10, that we're going to talk about is breathing. A lot of people don't understand how this applies to the muscle up, but newer athletes, the common mistake that they make is they overbrace going into every muscle up, like they're going to do a 300-pound clean. What that does is that just fatigues them out a little bit more by overexerting themselves, stopping their breathing patterns. We always recommend bracing the minimal amount that you need to do to safely complete the movement. What's our final take on this? Well, I'm glad you asked. We actually think that the bent knee method is slightly more efficient. We use 4 different points to arrive at this conclusion. Physics would suggest that this method is more efficient. Logan Collins actually won the event using this method. As all of the other athletes fatigued, they started to increase the knee bend and actually move more towards this method. 4, testing. So we tested this with a lot of our athletes, and we actually found that once they became efficient at this method, they actually improved their muscle ups. All right, so in conclusion, we think that this method is more efficient. From our testing, it has shown it is for our athletes, but we want to know how it works for you. So try this method out. Let us know how it works for you. Leave a comment, leave a like, send it to some of your friends, see if they can test it out, and let us know how it works out for you.